The Crime Prevention Research Center's Dr. John Lott is joining me. We're going to discuss gun bills pending before Congress that would address flaws in the NICS background check system and grant national reciprocity to concealed weapons license holders. I always love talking to my next guest. I actually haven't done interviews in a while with the new show, so I'm so glad that I was able to have him on as one of my first. Dr. John Lott runs the Crime Prevention Research Center. He is my absolute go-to authority on all things firearms, and he joins me now. Dr. Lott, thanks so much for being here.
Great to talk to you again.
Yeah, no, this was great because there's so much going on. So we've got two pretty important bills hitting the floor. One with regards to fixing the NICS check system, the National Instant Criminal Check System, the background check system in short, and the other is the reciprocity bill. Let's talk about the NICS check system first, because we saw a really big flaw in that system when Devin Kelly, guy who killed 26 people at a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, fell through the cracks. He had convictions in a military court with the United States Air Force, but he never made it into NICS. Why?
Right. Well, I mean, there was a big flaw there. He had done a couple things, at least, that should have put him on the list. One of them that is he had committed a felony. He had served a year in prison for assault. He had assaulted his wife and actually cracked the skull of his stepson. But the Air Force hadn't put his name in the system that was there.
It's really mind-blowing to me. Now, what I haven't been able to get an answer on, I actually reached out to the Department of Defense, and they admitted his name hadn't been entered. But what they've never really given us an answer on, I don't know if you found it in your research, is where the breakdown was. Was it the mistake of an Air Force employee? Was it the mistake of a DoD employee? Or is there just not a robust system in place for the military courts to share information with the NCIC and NICS databases?
You know, as far as I can tell, the vast majority of people who have felony convictions in the military are put on the list. Why this one particular case wasn't, I have no idea. I don't know any more than you do at this point. You know, my concern with the bill that's coming up, by the way, they've just recently announced that they're combining both the NICS fix bill with the reciprocity bill in the House. My concern is that there are lots of problems with the NICS system. You know, we're focused on one right here, and the thing is, it's extremely rare for criminals. Criminals may be dumb, but it's extremely rare that they're this stupid that they actually go to an FFL to try to buy a gun when they know they're prohibited.
Yeah, it never happened. I mean, I think I had one incident during my time on the street in the Bronx, one incident with a law-abiding gun owner, and it was a justifiable shooting. It was a retired police officer stopping a robbery. So you're 100% right. Legally owned weapons are rarely used in crimes.
Right. Well, so the concern that I have is, you know, when people talk about 3 million dangerous prohibited people that have been stopped from having guns because of background checks, that's simply incorrect. Almost all that 3 million are what we refer to as false positives, mistakes that were made.
Yep.
You can take the last year that there was an annual report put out on the NICS system in 2010. There were about 73,000 denials. Only 44 of those cases were referred for prosecutions, and they only got 13 convictions.
Wow. So wait, of the 73,000, what you're
Right.
saying is like 72,056 of them were mis-IDs, were false positives?
We don't know exactly, but almost all of them were.
Wow.
Probably.
Wow.
And you also have some state prosecutions, but those are about as small as the federal ones that are there.
Right.
And you know, the issue is if you go and put more names in the system and you don't deal with why you have that many errors in the system, you're going to create a lot more false positives.
Right.
And so, you know, but these are relatively easy things to fix. When you go and you buy a gun, you fill out the 4473, you have your name, your race, your height, your social security number, your address, your birthday. You kind of figure they must be using all that information, but they're not. They're using roughly phonetically similar names,
right?
And they're using your birthday. And the problem is that you can still get a fair number of matches there when you're talking about a country of 320 million people. And in particular, you have problems in certain racial groups more because people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks have names similar to other blacks. And, you know, about 30% of black males in the United States, for example, are legally prohibited from owning guns because of past criminal history. Well, whose names do you think they're most likely to be confused with? Other
Great point.
law-abiding
Yep.
black males.
Now, let me ask you a question. What would the fix be? Well, in your opinion, you research this maybe more than anybody else on the planet, John. I don't know if anybody does the research you do into these issues and firearms issues in a very holistic, using a very holistic approach. If you were tasked, the President of the United States tomorrow called you up and said, "Hey, Dr. Lott, you need to fix the NICS system for me," where would you start?
Right. Well, what I would do is probably the simplest thing is require that the federal government have to meet the same standards for doing background checks that we require of private employers. If private employers had an error rate that was 100th the error rate that the federal government has, they'd be sued out of existence.
Yeah.
And the reason why they don't have that error rate is because they use all that information that's available on the 4473 form. You know, they use the person's exact name. They use their social security number. They use their address.
Right.
They use other things like that in order to try to narrow it down and make sure that they're actually getting the person that they're supposed to be getting.
We call that pedigree information in law enforcement. Use as much detailed information as possible so that you know you've got the right person in the system. But because the worst thing you could do is misidentify someone. All right, so now that the bills are combined, the NICS fix is combined with reciprocity. Let's talk about reciprocity. It appears to have enough votes in the House to pass. I haven't really studied the Senate side. What are you seeing on the Senate side?
Right. Well, on the House side, they have 213 co-sponsors.
Yeah.
They need 218 to pass it for sure. I mean, it's an unusually large number of co-sponsors that they have. They easily have the votes in the House, as you say.
Right.
In the Senate, though, the Democrats have promised to filibuster it. They need to get 8 Democrat votes. And it's pretty clear that they're not going to get that. You know, based on past votes, when this type of issues come up, you would think that they should get at least 6 Democrats. But even a couple of the Democrats who have previously consistently supported this have now moved against it.
Well, they're just being contrarian along party lines. They may very well believe that. But let's talk about reciprocity for a second. You know, the cop in me has always despised the current system. It has always been inconceivable to me that a law-abiding Pennsylvanian is turned into a felon if they make a wrong turn to New Jersey or New York State for simply having the gun in their belt. We've seen it with the case of Shaneen Allen, the young mother down in New Jersey. We've seen it with military veterans. But what really gets me, and the media doesn't talk about it, is you have somebody that served multiple tours. There was a young Marine that went into New York City, right? And he was locked up for his gun. This is a guy who served multiple tours defending this nation, a guy with extensive firearms experience. The Marines put a lot of rounds down range, and he's being criminalized by some councilwoman that's probably never seen the inside of a gun shop or a gun range. That, to me, is a fundamental problem with government.
I mean, I agree with you. Look, it's not just the fact that sometimes people make mistakes and the examples that you've given in terms of kind of knowing the difference in laws in different places. But, you know, I get emails all the time from truck drivers, for example, who may have to drive through a state like New Jersey or New York or Illinois. And even though they have a permit and can carry most of the way, and even though they're concerned about having items from their truck stolen if they, you know, end up getting in trouble, they may be disarmed on the whole trip because of the jurisdiction that they're having to drive through.
And we saw that we saw that with the congressional baseball game, right? Wasn't it 5 members had concealed weapons licenses, but because they had to go through D.C. to get to the game and then back to work in D.C., they didn't have their firearms. And by the grace of God, Representative Scalise and a security detail were there. If not, there would have been sitting unarmed ducks on that field.
No, it's a perfect example. It's exactly right. We just know that at least 5 of them have concealed carry permits. Not everybody, most of them won't even answer the question whether they have them or not. And some of the staff did. one of the staff members who I talked to had a concealed carry permit and said he always carried when he was back in his home state, was about 30 feet away from the killer there, or the shooter in that case. And he was behind him, and he's had active shooter
Wow.
training, and he believes that he could have quickly taken him out. But as it was, the only thing that he could do basically was hide behind the car that was nearby him. He wasn't able to go and stop him. But no, you're exactly right. Even though Virginia has very liberal rules, they recognize permits from all the other states
Right.
in the country. Uh, uh, because they had to go and travel through D.C., it's a perfect example of what we're talking about there.
Yeah, and the Maryland side is no better. Maryland's just as bad as DC, if not worse in many respects.
No, that's exactly right. And so you have you have individuals who would normally be able to protect themselves who are disarmed as a result of not Virginia's law, but other laws that are there. And
Now,
you
now
know, it
what's
has
what's the public's? We know what the politician sentiment is on this kind of thing. They're going to go along party lines. They hate the president so much they'll block anything he supports, and they see him as a friend of the NRA and other pro-gun groups. But what are you seeing in your research with the American public? I mean, look, anecdotally, but then again, my audience might be a bit of a right-wing echo chamber. But anecdotally, I like to think I speak to people from across the aisle on social media, on air. Most Americans, except for those elitists who live in the cities, the LAs, the New York, the DCs, most Americans I talk to just think it's common sense. Many, and I was very surprised. You know, we start to get a little comfortable in our little bubbles with the subject matter we know. But I was surprised how many even Floridians, and we have a lot of concealed weapon licenses down here, assumed they were like driver's licenses. They just
right.
assumed that if they drove to New York, they were okay as long as they had their license in their wallet. And I had to explain to them, no, no, no. When you hit a couple of states, when you hit Maryland, Delaware is reciprocal with us. But when you hit Maryland, New Jersey, then New York, you're facing years in prison. But
Right.
most of the people I speak to are like, well, that's just kind of stupid. I mean, it's common sense, wouldn't it be? This is a constitutional right. Driving's a privilege. Let's make this universal. Let's make it reciprocal. We still have the politicians fighting, but is your research bearing out scientifically what I'm seeing anecdotally?
Right. I mean, most states have reciprocity agreements with most other states.
Right.
The average state has reciprocity agreements with 32 other states. But you have a real extreme. You have basically 7 states that don't have reciprocity agreements with anybody, and then you have most of the other states that have reciprocity agreements with almost everybody
Right.
else. And uh, but you know, whether you look at the American public's view, there are lots of surveys that indicate that a strong majority favor concealed carry. But you look at police also. Police One, which has about 450,000
Yep.
members,
Yep.
they their survey indicates that 91% of their members support concealed carry and reciprocity.
Yep.
You have the National Association of Chiefs of Police, about 86% of their members support reciprocity. So, you know, it's
Well, it makes their job easier, right? And I say this on air often. I've never seen a more pro Second Amendment group than in street cops who work in bad neighborhoods, because they learn very, very quickly that when they're backed up 5, 6 jobs on their radio and that call for an armed robbery or rape comes over, they're not getting there in time. Their response at best is going to be reactive. They're not going to stop the crime in progress. And very quickly, you learn when you hit the street that an armed victim tends not to be a victim and an unarmed victim tends to be. And so those numbers don't surprise me. Now the number from the chiefs of police does, because I found that appointed chiefs tend to mirror the sentiments of the liberal bosses who appoint them. So that's a very encouraging stat. I hadn't heard that.
right. You have 2 police organizations. You have the International
Yeah.
Association of Chiefs of Police, and then you have the National Association. The International Association is much smaller. They have like 100 members. 75 of them are from the United States.
Right.
The other organization has several thousand members. The International Association is against concealed carry.
They lean left.
Generally.
Yeah. They've always leaned a bit left on their policies as well, though. I've never been a fan of the IACP.
Right. And the National Association is very strongly supportive of it, though. But the much larger organization is. And look, I agree with your characterization of police. Look, anybody who's read my research knows that I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But as you say, the police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime's
Oh, yeah.
been committed. And they know how important having a gun is for their own safety. And they see it regularly, how important it is for law-abiding citizens to be able to protect themselves.
You know, I wrote an article for the NRA about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I said exactly that. It's interesting you bring that up. I said, you know, when my evolution of being such a vehement defender of the Second Amendment was when I was shot at. And my partner and I were shot at 8 times by somebody. Guy was 15 feet in front of us. And I said,
Jeez.
man, if he would do that to us, knowing we're armed, trained police officers, what's he going to do to the single mom on the bus stop trying to get to work? And it just became common sense for me.
Right. Look, if my research convinces me of anything, is that there are basically 2 groups who benefit the most from owning guns. The people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas, and people who are relatively weaker physically, like the example that you gave, women and the elderly. You're almost always talking about a male criminal doing the attacking. And when a man is attacking a female victim, there's a larger strength difference than a man attacking another man. And the presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in a woman's ability to go and resist the attack.
It's an equalizer. It most certainly is. And when women are, I used to train people, and I would just train women on a very simple tactic. Just get yourself in the far corner of your bedroom, and you make a decision. If that guy breaches that bedroom door, you fire. And when you train people and you put it into that context, there like a light comes on, and they say, you know what? This isn't an offensive, dangerous object that's going to murder my family while I sleep. This makes a lot of sense. I feel a lot better. And 2 women I'm very good friends with. I just down here in Florida, where you can, you know, lend a friend a gun. I just did because you know, they're 2 women. They live by themselves, and they were nervous. Their vehicle was stolen from their driveway in a very nice gated area, and they said, well, if somebody could jump the fence and steal the car, they could probably get into the house. You were right. We need to have a gun. And
what's the woman supposed to do
with
regard to the reciprocity if she's traveling and her car breaks down someplace? You know, maybe she can't quickly get protection in those cases.
Yeah.
You know, somebody pulls up, realizes that the person's helpless there. So look, you know, it'd be great if the police were every place all the time, but we know that they're not. And the question is, what's the best advice? So, I mean, there are lots of issues that are coming up that we're going to be hearing over the next day or so in the debate in the House on concealed carry. But, you know, they're going to make claims that permit holders are a danger to others. You know, the bizarre thing is a lot of these senators come from states where, you know, they already have reciprocity with other states. You have like 9 Democratic U.S. senators who, and one of those is an independent, who come from states that recognize permits in 48 or 49 of the other states.
And you're talking about Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and Vermont is a constitutional carry state. You don't even need a license in Vermont.
Right. But I mean, they're not going to vote for this, you know, despite the fact that they know from their own experience, there's no examples of problems occurring in their very own states. With even though they're essentially already have this national reciprocity with respect to their own state.
I mean, we have something like, I think, 3 million, I could be off, 2 or 3 million concealed weapons licenses issued now here in Florida.
It's 1.8.
Okay,
over time, from the beginning of when they've been issued, it's about 3 million.
Okay, but that's right.
Right now, active permit holders is about 1.8.
Oh, it's 1.8 million. About what is that? 10% of our state is armed, and it centers in the population areas. I live down in South Florida. I comb the news every morning just for content for the show.
Right.
I can't remember the last time a legal gun owner did something illegal with their gun. Well, we had one case where a police officer shot his ex-girlfriend and killed himself, but that was just rage and psychological issues. What I'm talking about in terms of wholesale crime, you just don't see it. It's just not happening. And I speak to the law enforcement guys down here. It's simply not happening. I think Florida, Texas, even Virginia are great test beds for this. So it seems to me the testimony being given by the Dems and the cherry-pick witnesses they're going to bring in is really disingenuous. How do you see this playing out? So you think the House it'll pass in the House, it'll die in the Senate?
Well, that's the way it looks right now. I mean, I guess the theory is if they can combine it with this Nix fix bill, they can get around the filibuster because they'll pass the Nix fix bill in the Senate. They'll pass kind of the combined bill in the House, and then the hope is it'll go to conference. and you can't filibuster bills that come out of conference.
Right.
But the problem is the Democrats see that coming down the road, and so they won't agree to going to conference. They won't appoint members to be able to go and do that. And so, unfortunately, I don't think anything's going to happen right now on this.
When is it? It's coming up. When is it coming up in the House? Tomorrow?
It votes Wednesday at 5 p.m. So, I guess if they can go and convince some Democrats to vote for this, maybe they'll put some pressure on the senators to go and do the right thing.
Well, let's have you back on next week after this. We'll do a post-analysis, see how it all shook out on the Senate side, or if there's any chatter.
Oh, that would be great. I mean, surely it'd be nice to educate people a little bit about the points that are going to be raised during the debates.
Yeah, I know it'll be great. And I'm changing the format of the show. We're going a lot longer. We're going to expand the show, and we're going to have guests every day. So the audience will be seeing you quite a bit. This, we've spoken quite a bit over the years. It's a passionate topic for me. So, Dr. Lott,
it's an issue of life and death for a lot of people. It's hard to think of something more important. And, what people have to realize, as you say, is how incredibly law-abiding these concealed carry permit holders are. And the issue is, what other options do they have when they're not able to defend themselves?
Yeah, and I want to leave the audience with one point, and it's personal observation. My friends who are concealed weapons license holders who aren't law enforcement train and shoot far more than my friends who are law enforcement and who typically just undergo I have some friends who are gun guys who are cops, but by and large, the cops go and qualify when they have to. My friends who are collectors and CCWs, concealed weapons holders, tend to shoot every weekend, if not every other weekend. And these people know how to handle their firearms. They know the laws. They know the rules. And they're incredibly proficient in use and safety of the guns. And I know you've seen that as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, you see even in the many states that don't require any training, there's a lot of evidence that these individuals take a lot of time. And here's the reason. These are very law-abiding citizens, and they know how much they have to lose if they do something wrong.
Yeah.
And so their life it's very easy to cross the line to become a felon if you make a mistake in using your gun. And so these individuals are reticent to use their guns. They're not looking forward to going and using them. They use them as an absolute last resort. And they're very careful in terms of the training. You see, I've seen states that have removed their training requirement and seen a big increase in the number of people who go to classes because more people are carrying. You know that the rate of carrying's gone up, and yet, even though you're not mandating training, we're seeing more people carrying as more people getting training as carrying goes up in those states.
And that, for me, that really just sums up the entire argument, and that really debunks everything that the left is trying to spew about gun control. Dr. Lott, John, as always, an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Such great information. We're going to be seeing you back next week. Have a great one.
Great to see you. Bye.
Such a great interview with Dr. Lott. He is a wealth of information. I want to keep bringing them to you, so please subscribe to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.